Good evening. This is Maestro Cretella with the Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite podcast. Today, we have a 1v1 on Green Tooth Gorge. Our first player today is Hobson, playing as Sindri, Trollface, Chaos Sorcerer. The Chaos Sorcerer is a spell-casting hero. He can shoot out Doom Bolts to do a lot of damage from long range. He can teleport in, especially if he has the Sword of Flame. That makes him pretty powerful as just a teleporting melee jump unit. He's also got some spells for control and disabling. And here we've got some Thousand Suns Chaos Sorcerer. Next up, we've got Maestro Cretella playing as Sindri, Trollface, Chaos Sorcerer. For me, I've kind of got my custom Tzeentch theme going on. I kind of just made it as a Tzeentch thing. Now, this matchup right here is absolutely disgusting. I played it before a long time ago against a player named Blessed Heretic, and it was absolutely disgusting. I lost it every single time. There's another time when I played Chaos Librarian. He's really good. And it was absolutely disgusting. I lost it every single time. So I've actually never won this matchup ever before. It's very, very messy. Things die all over the place. Like, squads get wiped in this matchup. It can be hard to make this matchup actually last a long time because things just get wiped. And if the matchup actually does last long, that's usually because things are getting wiped on both sides. So Hobson is a pretty good player. He's got like 2,000 hours on his account, so he's pretty good. Although I feel like he only just showed up like recently, and at first I didn't entirely know who he was, but I saw him play. He's pretty good, and well, we're gonna see where things are gonna go from here. So Hobbs he's got a double Heretic as well and a single Chaos Space Marine. I've actually got both double Heretics and double Chaos Space Marines. Now, one of the reasons I'm doing this is I kind of just want another squad out on the field. I want that extra range fire. I've noticed that on the receiving end, when I'm playing as the Sorcerer, there are times when I'm actually having trouble with multiple ranged units, particularly in Chaos Mirrors, that sometimes double Chaos Space Marine builds can be a little bit annoying, especially if I've only got a single Chaos Space Marine and 2 Heretics. Usually, unless the Heretics are both worshipping so that the worship overlaps and they conceal each other. I've definitely been in a lot of situations where double Chaos Space Marines would kind of just shoot away a lot of my Heretics and I would lose them really quickly and they wouldn't do much. As well as the fact that double Chaos Space Marines are obviously going to outshoot a single squad of Chaos Space Marines. Hobson instead choosing to get Noise Marines. And one thing you also notice here, normally pretty much the go-to 4th squad for any Sorcerer player is a Havoc. Like probably in at least 80% of matchups, that 4th squad is going to be a Havoc. And in this case, neither of us chose to do that. You know, in part because there is, of course, the Sigil of the Rift ability, and that's something that is going to counter a Havoc pretty hard because you can teleport it into double Heretics and kill it entirely. But even without that, we do, of course, still have the old-school Vestments of the Warped Sword of Flame play with the Sorcerer, which is also something that actually counters Havocs pretty well. Now, unfortunately, here we're going to have our first squad loss, and that was pretty much just a matter of positioning. He brought 1 Heretic squad to flank on top. Well, I don't know if that's flank, but either way, one came on top, one came from the bottom, and they just sandwiched my Heretics. They were non-aspiring champion, and that pretty much just wiped them out. So first squad loss of the game already. And already I'm replacing my Heretic squad, and you know, I do that. I'm very, very stubborn. I hate losing my Heretic squads, and in a way, it's not such a big economic loss, since I don't think I ever actually reinforced that Heretic squad. Heretics cost 210 requisition to purchase. They also cost 13 requisition to reinforce per model. Over the course of a whole game, you probably will spend more in reinforcements than the cost of an entirely new squad. So I have this theory that if you actually lose if you lose a non-aspiring champion heretic squad right at the start of the game, and then without ever actually having to reinforce it, it's actually not that much of an economic loss. Not any more than keeping that heretic squad alive and actually losing all those models and reinforcing them. So I've already got the Vestments of the Warp and Sword of Flame on my Sorcerer, and Hobbs is going for the same thing. Now this is more of an old school play, and definitely from what I've seen of good players playing the Sorcerer and also what I've been doing lately myself, I don't do this as much these days. And I don't do it as much because in a lot of matchups, particularly the Robes of Torment are usually just the better choice. And usually you don't want to spend basically the resources to get the Vestments of the Warp when you're probably going to end up getting the Sword of Flame. So here we've got a Heretic squad in a bad position for Hobbs, and again, just that positioning and having to retreat through double Heretics. I knew he was right here, he was going to have to retreat around the corner of that building and just bring my Heretics around. He was going to be in a lot of trouble. So the Sorcerer also teleporting out of there, and that's another reason to get the Sword of Flame in this matchup. This matchup is so volatile with how many, ooh, and let's look at this. I've got some Heretics. They teleported in using the Warp Global, and that combination of suppression from the Heretics and also the melee damage that they have prevented Hobbs from getting his Noise Marines into that building. And if he put his Noise Marines into that building, that would have been a winning play for him and a losing play for my Sorcerer. Since the Noise Marines would be shooting out of the building, do enough damage to the Sorcerer, not a whole lot, but enough. And the Sorcerer wouldn't have a whole lot he could do against him. I actually could use the Sword of Flame with the Coruscating Flame ability on himself as a very slight anti-garrison tool. But even without how little health they had, it probably wouldn't do enough to force them out of the building. It would just do some minor damage, but some very minor damage. So 2 squad wipes for me, and 1 for Hobbs. Hobbs also replacing his squads entirely, replacing his Noise Marines, replacing the Heretics, perhaps also stubborn as well. And one thing I've noticed about the Sorcerer, that it's something I've noticed, I don't know if it's entirely true, but could just be like a perceptual bias on my part, is that whenever I get just about anything with the Sorcerer, I always feel like it's pretty much necessary for my composition and that I really, really need it. And that if I don't have it, like if I lose a squad that I feel that I need, that's practically enough to really put me in a bad position, if not in a losing position. And I'd say the main exception to that is if I just get another Heretic squad, which is one of the main reasons to go triple Heretics, just to have another Heretic squad that's not really necessary for your composition, so that it can just run around capturing, and so that it's not a big deal if you lose it. So Hobbs is going to tier 2. I'm floating a bit. And if you notice, we got some spec chat in this game. But you know what? It's alright, because in this case, the spectators are actually cool. It's Frozen Vapor, and my good buddy, the protagonist, who is awesome. So spec chat is alright in this case. So Hobbs with the early VP lead, and me with a slight win in engagements, since I wiped 2 squads. Hobbs is going to tier 2 first, although not necessarily because of a tech advantage. Perhaps more just because I was floating. Managed to bash 1 generator, and normally having double Chaos Space Marines is also going to help with kiting the Sorcerer, and you know, I feel the double Chaos Space Marines, especially in tier 1 and with no upgrades, is not really that strong of a build for kiting, but it still can kite, unlike other Sorcerer builds which only have a single Chaos Space Marine where your kiting is extremely, extremely limited. Now, Sorcerer is also pushing his luck here, so I see him with low health, and I actually intentionally force melee because I have a feeling that that's going to result in a kill on the Sorcerer. Unfortunately, I really wasn't expecting to lose my Chaos Space Marine squad. With how much health they had going into that, I thought they'd just be able to quickly knock the Sorcerer down and then retreat out of there. but they took slightly longer to kill the Sorcerer than I thought, and a lot more damage came out of these 3 squads than I was expecting. And Protagonist is saying that as a trade, and basically I traded a Chaos Space Marine squad for a Sorcerer, so that definitely was not worth it. It would cost me 400 requisition to get a new Sorcerer, I mean to get a new Chaos Space Marine. It's only going to cost Hobbs 250 to get his Chaos Sorcerer back. And I would have really liked to keep that Chaos Space Marine alive, just with the potential scaling that Chaos Space Marines have. Chaos Space Marines are a unit that I feel their impact in Tier 1 is really not that strong, but they scale better than most other units throughout the course of the game. So, and usually I still want to get at least 1 squad of Chaos Space Marines in Tier 1, but otherwise, like, Chaos Space Marines in Tier 1 are pretty weak. Anyway, I've now got a Chaos Dreadnought out on the field. I used the Warp Global to just get it out here immediately, because I knew there was nothing any of these squads could do against the Chaos Dreadnought. And although the autocannon does not do a whole lot of DPS, the area of effect damage on that autocannon is actually very, very powerful against heretics. If you've ever let heretics just run around and get shot at by an autocannon dreadnought, it is very, very painful. And I think there have been times when I was expecting the autocannon dreadnought to not be that big of a deal against heretics, just because I know that the DPS value on the Chaos Dreadnought is not so high for the autocannon. But that splash damage definitely makes up for it against a squishy squad like heretics. So anyway, trying to hit the power a little bit, but now I'm actually backing off because I see the worship and I respect it. I don't entirely know what's going to be in there, and if I don't know what's being in there and I'm a little too brazen, that can result in a loss of the Chaos Dreadnought entirely. Now, Hobbs doesn't actually have that much that he can threaten the Chaos Dreadnought with. He does have his own Dreadnought with the Mark of Tzeentch, and that's going to have a clear advantage over an autocannon Dreadnought. But he doesn't have any kind of snaring AV. He doesn't have any other AV aside from the Dreadnought. So, and then even though the Chaos Dreadnought is very powerful, or the Tzeentch Dreadnought, I would probably still be able to keep it alive just by moving my Dreadnought out of there, using Worship to conceal it, etc. But instead, well, not instead, but my next move is I'm going for Plague Marines as supplementary AV. Basically, just in situations, this is like my personal approach that makes a lot of logical sense, although there are times when high-level players don't do it. But basically, when I have to deal with a vehicle, especially if I've got like equal vehicles compared to my opponent, I like to get out more AV so that I can have basically more AV as well as some kind of snare, usually put myself in a winning position compositionally as far as vehicles go. And right now I am in a winning position compositionally. His Dreadnought against my Dreadnought and Plague Marines should lose, but again, this is compositionally. It's not necessarily how things are going to work out in the course of the game, the plays we actually make. But right now my composition is a bit stronger for the purpose of keeping my vehicle alive and killing his. Now, unfortunately, I lost my Sorcerer right there. I tried to use the Icon of, or Curse of Tzeentch on the Heretics, and then I wanted to teleport him out of there, but I had already teleported in. The teleport was on cooldown, so Sorcerer went down. Also lost my entire power farm while Hobbs still has his.
One of our generators is under attack.
And I say that sometimes other players, other high-level players or better players, they don't always do what I'm talking about when I say, like, getting supplemental AV so that I have more AV and I'm in a winning position compositionally. Sometimes because they'll even like view it as unnecessary, because they might even be able to manage without getting the extra AV just on their micro and the way they manage their engagements. Now, it's riskier, it's harder. I do it in part because it's safer for me to have another Plague Marine squad, because that gives me a better chance of keeping my vehicle alive and taking out Hobbs' vehicle. But it just leaves me in a position where after that vehicle is destroyed, I've got another unit walking around these Plague Marines, which aren't going to contribute a whole lot to anti-infantry combat. So if we notice though, Hobbs now has 2 Dreadnoughts. So suddenly I'm not in such a winning position compositionally, and we're detecting each other's worship, and he's shooting up my heretics. Now I have my Plague Marines in here. The Myzine Dreadnought opens fire. I don't think I know yet that this Khorne Dreadnought is around. And I want the Plague Marines to start shooting, but unfortunately they're getting silenced by the Noise Marines, which is making life pretty hard for them. Probably going to bleed models before they get back into the Tzeentch Worship. And even if they do get into the Tzeentch Worship is now detected by heretics. Although those heretics walking into my worship does mean that they are going to be exposed. They're going to be vulnerable to my heretics that should unworship. They especially need to unworship now to save their own asses. And that was actually pretty much a losing situation for me as far as my Dreadnought, so I teleported it out of there. And that's just another tool that the Sorcerer has. The Sorcerer has so much for, and this is part of the reason a lot of the reasons why people get really annoyed with the Sorcerer. First of all, the Sorcerer has so much in terms of what he can use to wipe out squads as well as vehicles, and he also has on his own side a lot of get out of jail free cards, and that's one such case. That Khorne Dreadnought was chasing, so I worshipped in base to conceal my own Dreadnought again. Now the Dreadnought is chasing. Unfortunately, I'm still on the very losing position of my power economy. But although I was pushed off in that engagement, it ultimately did favor me, because I took out a vehicle and I didn't really suffer any considerable losses. The only thing I lost were heretic models. I don't know if I lost Chaos Space Marine models, but even that's still nothing compared to a Dreadnought loss. Now I've got the Curse of Tzeentch. That is an ability that it makes the squad members of a targeted squad explode on death, doing damage and knockback. It was actually somewhat recently nerfed to do, instead of originally it did a flat 25 damage. Originally it did a flat 25 damage per model explosion, and it was changed to do 15% of the model's hit points. And you know, I said nerf, and part of me did definitely believe for a while that it was nerf. Although as I'm looking at this heretic squad health, I'm actually wondering, because I think off the top of my head, I can't remember. Well, I'm not going to find 15% of 1,115. Instead, we're going to take a look at what's going on in this engagement. Hobbs now has some Plague Marines of his own, maybe seeing what happened in the engagement against his Tzeentch Dreadnought and losing it. And now we've got my Plague Marines are just kind of standing around. There are heretics around, but the heretics now have the Curse of Tzeentch on them, so those models are going to be exploding. Those are not Aspiring Champion heretics, so explosions all over the place, because that heretic squad just got wiped completely. Now the Icon of Tzeentch, or the Curse of Tzeentch, is best against really, really squishy squads. And I also used the Warp Level to try to send my Havoc into going after the Khorne Dreadnought, but unfortunately there are a bunch of Noise Marines and heretics right here, so they couldn't finish the job. And I lose my Sorcerer. But yeah, I didn't even mention that I have a Havoc. I have a Havoc, yet even more AV. So this is, again, me kind of going slightly overboard on AV. I do this sometimes a little bit just out of insecurity. And it's possible that I could take on this Khorne Dreadnought without it. If anything, it looks like I'm doing fine. Although that may also be because I have the Havoc. So the Icon of Tzeentch does get less effective against squads with more hit points per model, so it gets less effective against squads as squads level. It's less effective against squads like Chaos Space Marines than it is against squads like heretics. And part of the issue why I viewed the change to the Curse of Tzeentch as a nerf is that the change was trying to make the Curse of Tzeentch better against the squads that it's not good against, while making it worse against the squads that it was already good against. And to be fair, it was a little too good against squads like Guardsmen and Heretics. The problem is that I feel it's just worse against the squads that it's good against, while still not being good enough against the squads that it was never good against before. I imagine that was very confusing. But in any case, I got my Plague Marines right here, and I'm just bashing the power, and I'm bashing the power in part just letting them take the damage. I do have them standing behind this cover, and I know that they can just get shot at by the Tzeentch Chaos Space Marines as well as the Plague Marines, and I was able to take out 3 generators. Now that gets me red, which is one of the differences that's going on between Hobbs and I. Now if you notice, Hobbs has 482 red, I've only got 182. That's because when an opportunity comes up to actually use red, I use it. So far I've mostly been using it on Warp Globals, but pretty much I don't hold on to my red as the Sorcerer. I use it. I use Dark Flames. I use the Warp Global. I use the Summoning Circle, which is actually very, very good. Now, the Noise Marines are being very annoying to my solo Sorcerer. They got a special attack, did not knock the Noise Marines down, even though it did some area of effect damage. Now, Hobbs at this point is not worshipping, and possibly part of the reason he's not worshipping is that he lost one of his heretics, so he's only got 1 heretic squad around that he can actually use to worship. And here is that Summoning Circle Global. Now, that Summoning Circle Global, it's mostly just going to scare some of these things off. This isn't the best use of the Summoning Circle Global. I'd say the best use of a Summoning Circle Global is when you really want to commit to an engagement. You just lay it down at the start. Oh my god, wow, Chaos Space Marines lost a lot of models. I lost 3 models on my Chaos Space Marines. Lay it down at the start, and then that can help you win engagement. I mean, I guess I am kind of committing to engagement right here. It's just not the biggest or most exciting engagement. And I actually choose to get another Heretic squad. I did lose one of my Heretics, and I really want 2 Heretics. I'm really, really stubborn about that. Now, right here, I've got my Sorcerer. Noise Marine's in the building, and the Sorcerer really can't do a whole lot. I tried using the Coruscating Flames on him, but I think I might lose the Sorcerer in the process because now I've got Hobbs Sorcerer teleporting over here. And he should be able to finish off my Sorcerer. So I think that's at least 2, if not 3 Sorcerer kills. Or 3 deaths from my Sorcerer. Hobbs is actually floating quite a bit of resources, so I almost wonder if maybe it would be a good idea for him to get like another squad of Chaos Space Marines. That's going to be a wipe on the Noise Marines right there, and that was just another instance where I just recognized that the positioning was going to result in him having to retreat in a particular path, and I took that opportunity to wipe out that squad. That's a big personal strategy. There are a lot of times when I just recognize when a squad is in a bad position and when it's going to have to retreat in a path where I can put some heretics and I can just wipe out that squad. Now, I've already got an aspiring champion on my new heretic squad, and you know, I do that in part because although Hobbs doesn't have the Icon of Tzeentch, I know that it's an option, and I know that giving my heretics an aspiring champion, aside from making them more, it's going to make them much more durable and survivable in an actual fight. And if Hobbs actually does get the Curse of Tzeentch, it's also going to give them a much better chance of surviving if they have that aspiring champion than if they don't. So the Havoc is right here. Normally I've been keeping it a little further back. And Hobbs does have the Sigil of the Rift, so he can definitely teleport this Havoc and wipe it out. I mean, if he worshipped right here and then teleported out his Havoc, teleport out my Havoc, he would be able to wipe it. But he doesn't know where my Havoc is because it is infiltrated, And I'm throwing down another Summoning Circle Global. And that's, again, I'm committing to this engagement. The Havoc is taking shots, so the Khorne Dreadnought is now in a huge amount of trouble, but the Havoc is going to be teleported this time by the Sigil of the Rift, and I didn't react. So a lot of things are going to go on here. The Noise Marine's in a side position with almost no hit points. So it's really going to be up to, well, my Tzeentch Dreadnought takes out his Khorne Dreadnought, and now it's the Tzeentch Dreadnought against the Tzeentch Dreadnought. But it looks like Hobbs is really on the worst end as far as his squads, probably because I used the Summoning Circle Global, and I used it so much earlier. Now, he's got a Summoning Circle of his own, and somehow his Dreadnought actually dies first, although I did have a Havoc here. Maybe the Havocs, I teleported my Havocs to my Sorcerer's position, which was right there, although now he teleported away. So a lot of things just died in that engagement. We've got 3 Dreadnought Husks very close to each other, these two right next to each other. And part of what I'm doing that engagement, I mean, Hobbs obviously lost a lot of stuff. I'm taking the opportunity to just control the map. My Sorcerer came out of that engagement as someone who didn't get hurt too badly. So I teleported him to Hobbs' natural VP to basically to capture the point. Hobbs is getting yet another Dreadnought. So, I mean, all told, we've got to be like on our 6th or 7th Dreadnought between the two of us. Now I get the VP and, oh, I'm teleporting, trying to go after the Plague Marines, which are tying up my Havocs, and which I don't actually feel is a good use of his Plague Marines' time. The Plague Marines I'm just using to bash the generator so that I can get even more red to use in engagements. And if we notice, that's one of the things that I'd say is definitely giving me a bit of an edge in this matchup. I'm using red all the time, teleporting all the time, I haven't actually used Dark Flames in this match. But I'm certainly making use of that Summoning Circle. So he's got a new Dreadnought out on the field, but this one is only an autocannon, probably in part because he's low on resources. So he doesn't have a whole lot of resources that he can use for that. Unfortunately, I've still, wait, this is, do I have an entirely new Dreadnought as well? Yes, I do. I have an entirely new Dreadnought, and unfortunately this last Dreadnought from Hobbs is actually very short-lived. I had a Havoc, as well as my own Tzeentch Dreadnought, and now it's not looking so good for Hobbs, and he actually calls the GG and concedes with me with a triple cap. And yeah, so that was the first time I've ever won this matchup. But as you can see, very, very messy, a lot of crazy things happening. So many Dreadnoughts dying, and nobody getting to Tier 3. But, you know what? Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good night.